would give scientific proofs for the existence of God, and this provoked someone who is here tonight to send me this email. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but it goes like this. A little girl asked her father, "How did the human race start?" The father answered, "God made Adam and Eve and they had children, and so all mankind was made." 2 days later, the girl asked her mother the same question. The mother answered, "Many years ago there were monkeys from which the human race evolved." The confused girl returned to her father and said, "Dad, how is it possible that you told me the human race was created by God and Mum said they developed from monkeys?" The father answered, "Well, dear, it's very simple. I told you about my side of the family and your mother told you about hers." Thank you, Michael Harvey, for that. Peter Hewitt mentioned before that I put this on. I'm only one of many who have helped to put this on as well. There's been a committee of 5 ministers from the city who several months ago began to cast this vision for this. And Dr. David Strong, where are you, David? David is out there somewhere. He's outside in the foyer. David Strong approached me with the vision to do this, and we've helped put legs on it. And Ross Nicholson and a couple of others have been in from the ground floor with Steve Nicholson and others who've made this happen. So please don't think I did this. I was only one of several who made this happen. Dr. Hugh Ross, as I mentioned, was reading some of these advanced science books from a very young age. From around the age of 17, he began to explore, because of a professor's request, to explore the religious holy books of the world to see which one agreed the most with science. He explored all the major religious books of the world, and picking up a Bible he received in what we would call grade 7 of high school, which he hadn't read for a long time because, to use his language, it was written in a foreign language that was King James English. Having gone through high school and studying the plays of Shakespeare, he actually, by the time he was 17, had become familiar with King James English, and that Gideon's Bible that was presented to him got taken off the shelf. He read it. He encountered the God who created the universe. He wrote in the back of that Gideon's Bible, as many of you possibly have done tonight, his prayer of surrender, signing that Gideon's Bible that he had now given his life to Christ. Dr. Ross went on to become a research fellow at Caltech, which is one of the most prestigious physics universities in the world. It's where Stephen Hawking was a guest professor in physics. And he began to explore how science was actually giving more reasons to believe in God, not less. As a result of that, reasons to believe in apologetics, which is not the art of saying sorry, apologetics is giving reasons for why the Christian faith is credible, was birthed. Today there's over 30 staff, and it has a budget of nearly $4 million a year, and it has astrophysicists. It literally has NASA rocket scientists from the Jet Propulsion Lab on the Science Faith think tank, and it has biochemists. Some of the world's leading scientists are involved as guests as well in Reasons to Believe. It is an absolute honour to have Dr. Hugh Ross. Just a few weeks ago, he spoke in Houston. They expected a few thousand to turn up, and after that weekend, there was an accumulated audience of 43,000 people who came out to hear him. We are so privileged to welcome you to our city. Would you please put your hands together for Dr. Hugh Ross?
Well, thank you. I'm honored that so many of you have come here this evening. I'm especially touched by the prayers that were given by the pastors in your city here. And thank you, Mayor, for your kind words opening up our time. And we'll be looking forward to remarks from John Harrower as well. I am the founder of Reasons to Believe, and as you heard, we are a science-faith think tank. And our mission is to look at the frontiers of scientific research to develop new evidences for the existence of God. And our scientific team is counting a minimum of 10 research papers published per day that add to the weight of evidence for the Christian faith. And so we write articles, books, DVDs, we do podcasts, and you can catch all of that by downloading the Reasons to Believe app. And we heard a little bit about my story of how astrophysics brought me to faith in Christ, literally 8 years before I even met a Christian. Christians are hard to find in Canada. But if you want to see a video of that story and also my answering questions from skeptics, you can download this free video at reasons.org/AUS. That'll be up for the next 3 weeks. But the talk I've prepared tonight is to give you a quick survey of some of the latest scientific evidences for the Christian faith. And I want to begin by saying this is not about design. We scientists see design everywhere. That's not disputed. If you read the scientific literature, they're using that word over and over again. But we have this Australian physicist, Paul Davies, who refers to himself as an agnostic. He wrote in one of his books, when we look at the universe, the impression of design is overwhelming. Really, the question of the scientific community is what is responsible for that design? Did nature design itself? Or is there something more personal behind the design that we see? And so my mission this evening is really to answer 2 questions. Is the scientific evidence for the Creator God of the Bible's existence shrinking or growing as we learn more and more about the record of nature? And can we eliminate some or all the alternate explanations? In other words, can we not only establish the existence of God, but establish that it's the God of the Bible, as opposed to, say, the God of Islam, Hinduism, or Buddhism? Now, the model I'll be presenting this evening is a biblical creation model. And as you heard by introduction, I was reading textbooks in astronomy from the time I was 7 years of age. In fact, it was at age 7 that I read a book by Fred Hoyle called Nature of the Universe. And Fred took a Hindu perspective on reality, but this is what he said in Nature of the Universe. There's a good deal of cosmology in the Bible. It is a remarkable conception. And I remember thinking about that 10 years later when I first picked up a Gideon Bible. As I began to go through that Bible, realized that what Fred Hoyle said was right. That the Bible has 10 times as much to say about the origin and structure of the universe as all the rest of the world's holy books combined. And as you work through the Bible, there's basically 4 particular themes about the universe that it repeats over and over again and gives us considerable detail. Those 4 points are that the universe actually has a beginning. Not just any kind of beginning, but what we physicists call a singularity beginning. In other words, a beginning of matter, energy, space, and time. That the universe expands from that beginning, expands under laws of physics that don't change, or one of those laws is a pervasive law of decay. Now, looking at these 4 statements, those of you who are familiar with the basics of astronomy will see that these are the fundamentals of what we call the Big Bang creation model. And what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is show you where in the Bible these statements are made, and then the latest scientific evidence that establishes that indeed this is a correct view of the universe in which we live. And I've found no matter where I travel in the world, people may not know about the Gospel of John, but they all know in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And that's one of over a dozen texts in the Bible that speaks about the beginning of the universe. Now, I remember as a young man reading through the Old Testament and trying to find where does it talk about the universe. In biblical Hebrew, there is no word for universe, but there's this phrase, the Shamayaneres, the heavens and the earth. So whenever you see in the Bible the phrase heavens and earth with the definite article, it means the totality of physical reality. All matter, energy, space, and time. And the word create, bara in the Hebrew, means to bring into existence something brand new that never existed before. In the New Testament, Hebrews 11:3, the universe that we can detect was not made from that which we can detect. And we can detect matter, energy, space, and time. I don't have the passages here, but in Timothy and Titus, we're told about God's activities before the beginning of time. Now, this struck me in my teenage years because that was the very time when the first of the space-time theorems were being developed by British and South African physicists. And those space-time theorems actually established there must be a beginning to space and time itself. The significance of that is the other religions of the world teach that God or gods create within space and time that eternally exists. But the Bible stands alone in saying that space and time don't begin until God creates the universe. Now, when the first of these space-time theorems was published, it caused quite a stir amongst the community of physicists and astronomers, because what it was implying is that there was a causal agent beyond space and time that brought this universe into existence. And in particular, two theoretical physicists, Arvin Bourdais and Alexander Vilenkin, spent 10 years trying to find some escape hatch. Is there some way we can conceive of the universe where we're not stuck with this agent beyond space and time that creates everything? And over that 10-year period, they did find models of the universe where there wouldn't have to be this space-time beginning. But every one of those models would not permit the existence of life. And after 10 years, they published this paper in Physical Review Letters, Inflationary Space-Times Are Not Past Incomplete. Don't ask me where they get these titles from. But in this paper, they wound up coming up with a far more powerful space-time theorem that says that any universe that on average expands throughout its history has a beginning, including a beginning of space and time, thus implying a causal agent who transcends space and time. And only universes that expand throughout its history are capable of supporting the existence of physical life. Now, I would argue that this makes this the most theologically important theorem that human beings have ever developed. And we're living in the era when this has happened. No longer can scientists presume that all causes are natural. What the space-time theorems have definitively done is established that a miracle has taken place. In fact, it's the greatest miracle that any scientist could ever hope to uncover, the coming into existence of all physical reality. Now, my unbelieving peers refer to this as the causal agent beyond space and time. But pick up a dictionary. It's God. Some kind of God must exist. Now, Lawrence Krauss, a theoretical physicist in the United States, ranks as the most famous atheist in the United States, more famous for opposing creation and intelligent design than he is for his theoretical physics work. And he wrote a book just a few months ago, A Universe from Nothing. But on page 173 of that book, he made this amazing concession. One cannot rule out such a deistic view of nature. In other words, because of the force of the space-time theorems, at a minimum, we have to acknowledge there's a God that got the universe started. In fact, what's happening in the realm of astronomers and physicists who say that they do not believe, it's moved away from against the existence of God to an attack against a personal God. So people like Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, they accept there must be this kind of agent that brings into existence the universe, the mathematics, and the physics, but they're insisting that this God is not a personal being. Is this God personal? And did he design the universe and the earth for human beings? Well, as much as the Bible says about the beginning of the universe, it's got much more to say about the expansion of the universe. Now, most people attending church don't see this, but it's because it's not in the book of Genesis. It's not in any of Moses' writings, but it is in the oldest book of the Bible. Job chapter 9, verse 8. Job says, God alone expands the universe. Now, many of your translations will say God stretches out the heavens, but the verb is the verb natah, which means the expansion of what's being described. And it's not just Job who speaks about this. David speaks about it, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, all speak about this expansion of the universe. And a few years back, I debated Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society on this issue, and he was insisting that all these passages were simply figures of speech. But you notice in these 11 passages, the verb natah is in all three Hebrew verb forms, which means it's literally speaking about a continual expansion of the universe. And this was noted by Jewish theologians as much as 800 years ago. So this isn't just simply astronomers reading this from hindsight. Foresight of the Bible tells us that indeed it's expanding. And the significance of this is the Bible was the only text of philosophy, science, or theology that was saying we live in an expanding universe until the 20th century. So for thousands of years, the Bible stood alone in making this statement about the universe. And many years ago, I wrote a book, The Creator and the Cosmos, in which I gave the strongest scientific evidence that we must indeed live in an expanding universe. I don't have time to present that tonight, but what you'll see here is, thanks to the Hubble Space Telescope, a visual demonstration that indeed we live in a continuously expanding universe. What you see there on the left is an image of galaxies where we're looking 12 billion light years away, which means we're seeing the universe as it was 12 billion years ago. And notice that the galaxies are jammed so tightly together, they're tearing spiral arms off one another. But as we look at galaxies 2 billion light years away, only 2 billion years ago, the universe has expanded and stretched apart the galaxies to such a degree that this phenomenon no longer takes place. Then the third thing, 7 places in the Bible that tells us the laws of physics don't change. One example is Jeremiah 33:25, where God speaks and he says, I've established the fixed laws of heaven and earth. And if you read the whole chapter, God is saying to the Jewish people, you change, but I don't change. And as proof that I don't change, look at the laws that govern the universe. As they don't change, I don't change. As an astronomer, I can tell you we've now measured the constancy of physics as far back as the past 12 billion years. And over those 12 billion years, we can measure that the laws of physics have not changed by more than 1 part in 100 quadrillion per year, demonstrating what the Bible said thousands of years ago indeed is correct. And then the fourth thing, the universe is subject to a pervasive law of decay. Virtually the whole book of Ecclesiastes is speaking about this pervasive law of decay. Romans 8 sums it up by saying the entire universe is subject to this pervasive law of decay. Now, I remember reading these texts in my teenage years and saying, this means that the Bible was declaring thousands of years ago that we live in a universe that gets colder and colder as it gets older and older, which is a fundamental feature of Big Bang cosmology. You say, how do you put that together? Okay, you got a space-time beginning where the universe is expanding from that space-time beginning, where the laws don't change, and one of those laws is a pervasive law of decay, then the universe must get colder and colder. It's the principle of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Many of you probably got here by automobile. The principle of your automobile engine is based on this physics. When the piston chamber expands, the temperature goes down. When the piston chamber compresses, the temperature goes up. That applies to all of physical reality. Now what this means is, well, back in 2006, I was at the University of California, Santa Barbara, doing a debate with a quantum physicist. And he says, I want to see the Bible making a numerical prediction, a prediction I can measure with my instruments and see whether it got the numbers right before I will believe. I said, well, how about this? Here's the Bible saying that the universe is getting colder and colder. We're under laws of physics that don't change. What you see here in this next graph is a biblically predicted cooling curve for the universe. Now, the only thing I need to put into here external to the Bible is the age of the universe. With that one data point, we get this cooling curve, and what you see on that curve are 13 measurements astronomers have made of the past temperature of the universe. And the one in the middle is the latest measurement, where the error bar is so tiny, the error bar is actually smaller than the width of the line that you see up there. In other words, these measurements perfectly match the biblically predicted cooling curve. Now, today we also know the factor that's most responsible for governing this cosmic expansion. It's something called dark energy, only discovered in 1999. Dark energy, we now know, makes up 3/4 of all this stuff in the universe. What is dark energy? It's the energy embedded in the space surface of the universe. And if you want a good analogy for the universe, think of planet Earth. Planet Earth is a 3-dimensional body, but we human beings live on the 2-dimensional surface of that 3-dimensional body. In the case of the universe, all the stars and galaxies, all the matter and energy is constrained to the 3-dimensional surface of the 4-dimensional expanding universe. And dark energy is embedded in that surface. And the way it works is, the greater the area of that surface, the more powerfully dark energy accelerates the expansion of the universe. So when the universe was young, the surface was small, and dark energy was weak in its capacity to accelerate cosmic expansion. But with the universe as old as it is now, dark energy not only is expanding the universe, it's expanding it at a faster and faster rate as time goes by. But it's also the area where we see the greatest evidence for fine-tuning for the benefit of life. And here's how it operates. If the dark energy parameter were any greater, then the universe would expand so rapidly that gravity would not be able to collect any gas to make galaxies, stars, or planets. The universe would be forever dispersed gas, and life would be forever impossible. On the other hand, if the dark energy parameter were slightly stronger than what it is, then, weaker than what it is, then gravity would collect all the gas of the universe into nothing but black holes and neutron stars, where the minimum density exceeds 2 billion tons per teaspoonful. A density that's so extreme that molecules are impossible. Atoms are impossible. Even protons and electrons are impossible. And of course, life would be impossible. So to what degree do we have to fine-tune dark energy so that life would be possible in the universe? We have to fine-tune it to 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. That's 122 zeros after the 1. To put that into context, there's only 10 to the 79 protons and neutrons in the entire visible universe. Or to give you another point of comparison, we can compare that level of fine-tuning design, 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power, to the very best example of human creativity, inventiveness, and design. In my opinion, that would be the gravity wave telescope known as LIGO, the finest instrument that we human beings have ever invented and built. But if we compare that best example of human creativity and design to what we see in dark energy, it literally ranks 10 to the 97 times inferior. Now, that allows us to draw the conclusion that the one that designed this dark energy and set it up and created it, at a minimum, is 10 to the 97 times, that is 10 trillion times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the Caltech and MIT physicists that invented this machine and designed it. And I've worked with some of these individuals. They're not dumb. They're really brilliant people. But the creator of the universe is that many times more brilliant, and that many times better funded than the U.S. government that made it all possible. Now, I think you get my point here. This isn't just a transcendent causal agent, an agent beyond space and time that sets up the math and physics. Because only a personal being can manifest the attributes of creativity, of power, of intellect, and knowledge. So it's a personal being. Now the significance of this was not lost on the community of physicists who weren't believers. In fact, I have with me here a paper that was published by 3 theoretical physicists, all of whom who were atheists, in response to the discovery of dark energy and the fine-tuning in dark energy. The title of their paper, Disturbing Implications of a Cosmological Constant, which is another word for dark energy. And they were interviewed by the senior editor of Nature magazine, himself an atheist. And this is what these 3 physicists said in the interview. Quote, arranging the cosmos as we think it is arranged, that is with dark energy, would have required a miracle. Second comment, an unknown agent, namely beyond space and time, intervened in the evolution of the universe for reasons of its own. A remarkable statement for 3 atheist theoretical physicists to make, that there's this agent beyond space and time performing miracles for reasons of his own. Hence, they concluded their research paper with this last sentence. Perhaps the only reasonable conclusion is that we do not live in a world with a true cosmological constant. In other words, their conclusion was dark energy must be wrong. It can't exist. Because if it exists, then we're stuck with an agent beyond space and time performing miracles for reasons of his own. Now, the irony of this paper is it was published just months before astronomers developed 9 independent observational demonstrations that not only is dark energy real, it's the dominant component of the universe. And here's a brief list for you of these 9. Galaxy cluster X-rays, cosmic background radiation measurements, type 1a supernova gravitational lenses, radio galaxy distribution, Sloan digital sky survey, 2-degree field survey, velocity distributions of radio galaxies. If I had time, I would give you the details on all 9 of these, but I think you'd be grateful that I'm not giving you all the details. But what you'll see there at the bottom is a URL you can go to where you'll see articles I've written for lay audiences on these 9 discoveries. In fact, I've also included 16 more because today we have 25 independent astronomical observations that demonstrate that dark energy not only is real, but makes up most of the stuff of the universe. What does this mean? We really are stuck with an agent beyond space and time who's performing miracles for reasons of his own and for the specific benefit of life and human beings in particular. Dark energy is not the only physical factor that shows this very high level of supernatural design. We literally see it pervading the entire universe and all the laws of physics. So this is a brief list of these examples of supernatural design. And when you see sea life there, that's carbon-based life. Now, 35 years ago, chemists were saying maybe we can make life with boron or with silicon or arsenic. But today we know only carbon permits the complexity and the stable bonding that permits the existence of physical life. And that's the only assumption that goes into this list. So, for example, if we don't fine-tune the strength of the electromagnetic force relative to the gravitational force to better than 1 part in 10,000 trillion, then stars will either never form or they'll form and instantly explode, and life will be impossible. Now, if this design really is the work of the God of the Bible, the supernatural handiwork of the God of the Bible, then we would expect that as we physicists and astronomers learn more about the universe and the laws of physics, that this list would grow. And so back in 1991, we began surveying the scientific literature and found 17 different features of the universe that showed this very high level of fine-tuning design. And what you see here in the table is that as the years go by, the list gets longer and longer, where the list now stands at over 180 different features that show this high level of design. And you can go to that URL, and there's a 300-page paper that I wrote that documents this evidence. Or if you want a one-sentence summary, how about this one? The heavens are the work of your hands. So you can read the 300-page paper, or you can just look at this, okay? Now, today there's about 50 books published on what's called the anthropic principle. That's something that all of us astronomers agree upon, that when we look at the universe, we see this overwhelming evidence that has been designed for the benefit of human beings. However, this is typically where those books stop. They stop at the level of the universe as a whole. The truth is, we see this evidence for supernatural design at all size levels. We see it at the level of the universe as a whole, which is what all these other authors are writing about, but the truth is, we also see it for the cluster of galaxies in which we live. And over 200 different features of our Milky Way galaxy must be fine-tuned to make possible the existence of advanced life. And you need a just right star, we need a just right Jupiter and Saturn. In fact, today we now know that every planet in our solar system, now that we've demoted Pluto from the list, all 8 of the planets in our solar system play a critical role in making possible advanced life here on planet Earth. So we're around the dinner table, our family thanks God for Mercury, for Venus, for Uranus, for Neptune, and down on the list. And of course, we need a highly fine-tuned Earth. Over 350 different features of the Earth have to be fine-tuned, and over 20 different features of the Moon. Now, the advantage of going from the universe as a whole down to these smaller size scales is we can do statistical tests. In the case of the universe, there's only one universe we can see. If God made 1,000, we'll never know. We can only observe the universe in which we live. But we can literally see billions of clusters of galaxies and billions of galaxies and stars, which allows us to develop these kinds of tests. If there is no greater God behind all this that we see in the universe, then we would anticipate as we learn more and more, the design evidences would decrease, both in the number of parameters and in the degree of fine-tuning that we measure, and that the evidence for the biblical God would get progressively weaker and weaker as we learn more and more. But if it is the creator God of the Bible, we would predict the exact opposite. And this is what we scientists like to do in terms of trying to distinguish between competing models of explanation. Develop predictions from the models that are basically the opposite of one another, then go out and make measurements and see who got it right. So we began looking at this starting in January of 1995, looking through the scientific literature and determining the number of characteristics of our galaxy and our solar system that would have to be fine-tuned to make life possible. And at that time, there were 41 features where we could measure a very high level of fine-tuning design, and appropriately taking into account the dependency factors and the maximum number of planets. I had Carl Sagan as a professor, so I used his optimistic number. Even then, less than 1 chance in 10 to the 31st power that you'd find a body anywhere in the universe that would have all 41 features in place so that life would be possible. That was 1995. This table shows you how the evidence has increased with respect to time. So in December of 2006, it wasn't just 41 features that showed this high level of fine-tuning design. The list now stood at 676. By the way, this is not referring to advanced life. This is just what you need to get bacteria residing on a planet for a significant period of time. And the probability of that happening without divine intervention was less than 1 chance in 10 to the 556th power. Now, if you look at the last column, I want you to observe how the evidence is increased with respect to time. What you see there is on average, the evidence has gotten a factor of 1 million times stronger per month that it takes the intervention of the God of the Bible, his supernatural intervention, in order to make possible the existence of bacteria for a significant period of time on a plant. And again, if you want to see the documentation in the peer-reviewed literature, you can go to the URL reasons.org/fine-tuning. Up will pop that 300-page compendium. But where else can you go in Christian apologetics and get 1 million times more evidence in just 1 month? Or what I often will say to a university audience of skeptics, if you're not convinced today, wait 1 month and see what happens to the evidence. Freeman Dyson, an American physicist who at times describes himself as an atheist and other times as an agnostic, he wrote in his book, Disturbing the Universe, "The more I examine the universe, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense must have known we were coming." In other words, the universe was designed in advance for the appearance of human beings. This is a test that was proposed by Stephen Hawking, who holds to a deistic worldview, but not a theistic worldview. He wrote in his latest book, The Grand Design, that we're going to be able to find many planets, many planetary systems, many galaxies, in which life would be possible, including advanced life. In fact, now he's arguing that since we're messing up planet Earth, we need to have a plan to get on spaceships and go to another planet. Now, from the biblical perspective, God creates the universe as a vehicle to bring about the end of all evil and suffering. And it tells us in the book of Hebrews that we human beings are the critical component for that. Namely, that God is using us as a tool in his hands to bring about the end of evil and suffering. Therefore, we would anticipate from a biblical perspective, this would be the only place in the universe at which advanced, intelligent life exists. Which means from a biblical perspective, you'd be predicting that the Milky Way galaxy, the sun, the moon, Earth, and Earth's planetary partners would prove unique in their capacity to sustain advanced life. Now, this is a risky prediction for both groups because this research is still ongoing. We're still checking out galaxies and stars and planets to see if our system is unique or whether it's just a run-of-the-mill common planetary system. Now, in the case of galaxies, we know that for light to be possible, you need a spiral galaxy. That's the only way you're going to have the stars far enough apart. We also know that the spiral structure must be highly symmetrical. If you want advanced life with the spiral arms having a certain separation, the galaxy must be a certain size, and there can't be too many spurs and feathers between the spiral arms. And we can measure thousands of spiral galaxies with sufficient precision to see if they're a candidate or not for advanced life. And of the many thousands that we can measure with that degree of precision, we have 0. Only the Milky Way has the capacity to sustain advanced life. That's what ruined my enjoyment for the Star Wars trilogy. Once they said a galaxy far, far away, I said, if we look far, far away, we don't see any galaxies that could be possible candidates. And where this has been done with the greatest diligence is on stars, because stars are bright, they're easy to see and measure, and we've actually measured millions of them to see if any of them would be sufficiently like the sun that they would be a candidate to have a planet orbiting them with advanced life on it. And what we astronomers have found over the past 50 years are stars that are twins of one another. But when it comes to the sun, we've yet to find a star that's a twin of the sun. And as of today, 1,780 planets have been discovered outside of the solar system, and not only are any of them not like the Earth, none of them are like any of the 8 planets in our solar system. And this is what led us to discover that every planet in the solar system plays a critical role for making advanced life possible here on planet Earth. Now, when it comes to moons, we don't yet have the telescope power to find moons in other planetary systems. But we have found 178 in our solar system. But of those 178, only our moon has sufficient mass relative to its planet. In fact, our moon sticks out like a sore thumb. If you look at the mass of our moon compared to the mass of the Earth, it's 50 times bigger than any other moon in our solar system. And that's the only way you can have a stable tilt of the rotation axis. The other planets, their rotation axis tilts back and forth. The moon doesn't. It's stabilized by this giant planet that is orbiting our moon. Now, that is a review of the simple sciences. The simple sciences are physics, mathematics, astronomy, where we can describe things with differential equations. I'm going to just in a few minutes introduce you to the complex sciences, the life sciences, where things are so complicated we can't develop differential equations to predict their behavior. I mean, I have 2 sons. My frustration as a father is I cannot develop differential equations to predict the future behavior of my sons. It works on stars and galaxies. It doesn't work on people. It doesn't work on any life form. But if you want to go into more depth on some of these more exciting discoveries about our universe that demonstrate that not only is it designed for advanced life, it's designed to be a tool in God's hand to eliminate all evil and suffering rapidly and efficiently, you can get the book at the back table there, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. And don't worry about it, it's written for a very lay audience. But let me just take a couple of minutes to talk about the life sciences. Now, where we know the most is on the origin of physical life. And I had the privilege at the University of Toronto of taking a course from Carl Sagan. And in that course, he laid out his model for the origin of life. That life naturally arose in a vast sea of concentrated prebiotics that percolated for nearly 1 billion years. Earth, long ago, was a water world with no continents. So he said, let's just pack all that water with prebiotic molecules, shake it up for 1 billion years, and he said, inevitably, a life form will come out. Well, what we've learned since that time, a few decades ago, is that it's not 1 billion years. That the origin of life literally takes place in a geologic instant. There is no time for the origin of life. How do we know that? We know that thanks to an event called the Late Heavy Bombardment. When you look at the moon, you see craters. You also see craters on Mercury and Mars. And those 3 bodies all have thin atmospheres. Even the moon has a very thin argon atmosphere. And we look at those craters, we can see subtle signs of erosion. And as we measure that erosion, it tells us that the inner solar system suffered a very catastrophic bombardment, peaking at 3.87 billion years ago. And planet Earth, of all the inner solar system bodies, take the greatest damage. Because of our gravity, we took 30 times the damage that the moon took. So intense was the bombardment, it raised the temperature of the surface of the Earth to about 3,000 degrees centigrade, basically turned the surface into liquid lava. And of course, under those conditions, there's not any possibility for life and no possibility for life chemistry. Situation, though, is that this Earth, 3.87 billion years ago, thousands of degrees, liquid lava, and it takes 40 million years for the Earth to cool enough that liquid water would form and you would get solid rocks. But the moment we got liquid water and solid rocks, we have isotope evidence that life was abundant on planet Earth. Say, how do you get that? Well, all of you here have carbon in your bodies. But because you're a living organism, your body takes carbon-12 into the environment in preference for carbon-13. So carbon that doesn't come from an organic source will have a higher ratio of carbon-13 to carbon-12 than anything that is living or once was living. And this is what we notice, is that when we look in the most ancient rocks on the face of the Earth, the first rocks that form, we notice that we don't see the signature of prebiotics. We do see evidence of the decay products of once living organisms, but we see no evidence that there was ever any carbon-based molecules that were of a non-organic source. And likewise, life prefers nitrogen-14 to nitrogen-15 and sulfur-32 to sulfur-34. So we got 3 independent isotope signatures telling us that life was abundant on planet Earth 3.825 billion years ago, but that the origin of life took place without the benefit of any prebiotics. And it was a Romanian physicist that explained why the Earth never had the building blocks of life. It's called the oxygen ultraviolet paradox. Namely, that if you got oxygen in the Earth's environment, that oxygen stops the formation of the building blocks of life. But if you don't have oxygen, then there will be no ozone to stop the ultraviolet radiation streaming in from the sun. And at that time, ultraviolet radiation was thousands of times more intense than it is today. So if you have oxygen, it can't happen. If you don't have oxygen, it can't happen either. Now, if you got no time and you got no suit, if you got no time and you got no building blocks, then you do not have a naturalistically possible model for the origin of life. Your only alternative is a supernatural explanation for how those living things came about. If you want to read about this in more detail, we have a book at the back called Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, where I talk about the 3 different origins of life: the origin of physical life, the origin of life that's physical and soulish, namely the birds and mammals, and the one and only species that's body, soul, and spirit. But if you want a detailed book on the first origin of life, you can get this. It's not at the back, but you can get this through our website, Origins of Life, which, by the way, was reviewed by David Deemer, one of the world's leading origin of life researchers, a lifelong atheist. And what he wrote in Origins of Life in the Biosphere is this is the best book on the origin of life, the most comprehensive and up-to-date in the science. I like everything about the book except the Jesus Christ part. And then just a minute on the origin of human beings, the third origin of life. We are the one and only species, according to the Bible, that's body, soul, and spirit. Is it possible, according to the Darwinian paradigm, that we actually evolved from bacteria step by step into actual human beings? This was taken up by Francisco Ayala at a conference on whether or not extraterrestrial intelligent life is possible. Francisco Ayala is an evolutionary biologist, a Darwinist, but he said the Darwinian principles of natural selection, mutations, and gene exchange always favor simplicity over complexity. And so he did a formal calculation of the probability that starting with unicellular life, you'd wind up with human beings or the functional equivalent, and came up with this probability that was less than 1 chance in 10 to the 1 millionth power that would happen, and therefore said at the conference, we know there's no possibility for extraterrestrial intelligent life with a probability this tiny. 3 physicists at the conference said, wait a minute, you neglected the impact of changes in the solar system. The sun is getting brighter, the earth is rotating more slowly, the radiation environment changes. The probability is much tinier than what you think. It's only 1 chance in 10 to the 24 millionth power. That's 24 million zeros between the decimal point and the 1. To give you an idea what that probability is like, it's the probability that a person living in California would win the California lottery 3 million consecutive times if he or she buys just 1 ticket each time. Or as a mathematician friend of mine put it, it's no different than the probability of winning the California lottery 3 million consecutive times where you don't buy any tickets at all. Now, this was given as a formal proof that it's impossible for extraterrestrial intelligent life to exist. But these same proofs demonstrate that it's impossible for us human beings to exist if indeed we evolved through natural process from bacteria. In other words, we need to see that Psalm 104 got it right, where it says that God is the author, the creator of all life that has ever existed on planet Earth, and how God created all that life for the specific benefit of human beings. Hebrews 11:6 says, anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. And that was my purpose in coming this evening, is to give you the latest and best scientific evidence that indeed there is a God that exists, that it's a good God, and that it's a God that wants a relationship with each one of us. So hopefully I've gotten you started, and we're going to have a time for questions up here at the microphone. So if you've got any other doubts that you want to bring up, feel free to come. And just let me say, this message that you heard this evening, I gave this message at Caltech at the International Skeptic Society Conference. The audience was 700 atheists, and I was debating Victor Stenger at the end. If you'd like to see what this kind of message does in front of an audience of 700 well-educated atheists from around the world, you can get this. It's at the back. It's called The Great Debate. And you won't believe what Victor Stenger, the atheist particle physicist, said at the very end of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. For those people who may have thought, wow, my head hurts, we did sort of publicise this was a festival of art, music and thought, and this was the thought bit. So let me see if I can help put some of these terms into perhaps ways you may be able to get your head around it. When Dr. Ross talks of a Big Bang, the Big Bang was an expression that was used to ridicule what the Bible says about the beginning, the very beginning. And it simply means that because we know all energy, space, time and matter began, when he uses the expression causal agent, all he's saying is something caused it. In fact, we know who that is. Now, Professor Brian Greene, who is famous for developing and articulating what's called string theory, he says we as physicists don't know what it is, but whatever it is, whatever the causal agent is, he was a grand organising designer. You work out the initials. That's all the beginning means. So whenever you hear Big Bang, don't get scared about it. It wasn't a bang, it wasn't an explosion. It just simply means beginning. The other point is fine-tuning. Dr. Ross has mentioned tonight there was in 2006 there was 180 features. Well, in fact, they're category features. In other words, within those features, there's lots more things. In fact, he then brought up another chart which showed some of those. In 2006, there was 676 features required for even the simplest life on Earth. Now, let's understand what he means by that. That is 676 things needed to be in place simultaneously in order for the most simplest life to form. When you consider human life, that number doubles to around 1,200 at the same time features that must be in place for life to be possible on Earth. He's mentioned the numbers. How could that happen by chance? Well, he said it would be like initially buying a lottery ticket every week and winning every week for 3 million weeks. You would win First Division. He also used a term that you may not be familiar with, and that is the term deism. Deism is something that theologians and others use to describe a God who created it all but then left, and he doesn't really care what happens to what he's created. That's deism. When he's described our planet exhibits something that's called the anthropic, which means humanity, the anthropic principle. Astronomers say that our planet is the only planet in the entire universe that can sustain advanced life. In fact, they call our planet, it's in a belt called the Goldilocks zone. It's just right. And how many just right things are there? You saw the numbers on the table there. There are thousands of just right things needed. This is what's called fine-tuning. Dr. Ross has concluded by saying that without God, not just simple life, any life is not possible. It's just not possible. Whatever caused space, energy, matter and time must not be subject to that. So we are looking for some creator that is not subject to space. We call that omnipresent. We're looking for a creator who is not subject to time. We call that eternal. We're looking for a creator who is not subject to material limits. We call that spiritual or immaterial. We're looking for a creator who is not just reasonably smart, but is infinitely smart. And the God of the Bible, as revealed in the Bible, is the only candidate. And we'd like to give you opportunities to the first 5 or so people. If you have a question for Dr. Ross, we have a microphone here. If you come and form a neat queue in an orderly manner behind Ross here, Dr. Ross will take your question. So if you'd like to come up to the microphone and ask your question, if you don't have any, I'll ask them for you.
Dr. Ross, I read an article here recently that in 5 seconds the world could be destroyed by just removing oxygen. Would you like to expand on that?
Well, if you take the oxygen out of the Earth's atmosphere, then every one of us will breathe our last breath. It wouldn't be just 5 seconds, but you would be dead in about 4 or 5 minutes. And that would be the case of all life. So yeah, you need oxygen. And the basis of that statement is just how difficult it is to get a huge amount of oxygen in the environment. Matter of fact, the origin of life is the origin of photosynthetic unicellular life. It's not the simplest life. The simplest life has about 400 gene products, but photosynthetic bacteria has over 4,000 gene products. And they were here in great abundance at the very beginning of life. Why? Because God's intent was to pump oxygen as aggressively into the atmosphere as possible. And it literally took 3 billion years of photosynthetic activity in the greatest possible quantity to get it up to 10%, which is when you see the beginning of animal life. It's called the Cambrian explosion, where virtually every conceivable kind of body plan for an animal shows up all at once. But it needs to be 20% before creatures as active as us human beings and birds and mammals are possible.
Thanks very much, Dr. Ross. It's encouraging to meet someone who's also distressed by the limited applicability of differential equations. Kindred spirit. But what I was wondering is one of the escape clauses, I think, for the fine-tuning argument has been the multiverse. I
Yes.
wonder what thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, the multiverse is this concept, and by the way, back in the early 1980s, we had reasons to believe we're predicting the atheistic scientific community inevitably would go to a multiverse. It's the only place they've got to go. When the evidence becomes this utterly overwhelming for supernatural design, and you want to stick with an atheistic worldview, your only option is to say there's an infinite number of universes, where every one of them is different, with different laws of physics, where actually every possible set of values for the laws of physics and the characteristics of bodies in that universe would be represented. And mathematically, you would need an infinite number of universes for all that to be possible. But it raises the question, why would they all be different? What if they're all the same? Then you gain nothing. But here is the problem with the multiverse. There's several problems, and I write about this in a book called More Than a Theory. But one of the problems is it explains too much. It's basically designed to explain away all this evidence for design that we see in the universe. But it would also explain away all the evidence for design by every human being. In other words, I could appeal to the multiverse and say in an infinite number of universes, I'm going to have an infinite number of planets with random markings in the sands on their beaches, where those random markings are going to duplicate all the letters and sentences and equations in every paper published by Stephen Hawking. Therefore, his research papers are not the product of an intelligent mind, they're the product of a multiverse. And in one respect, I would argue the multiverse is testable. A lot of people say it can't be tested because we can't see other universes. But here's how it could be put to the test. An analogy. I could flip a coin in front of you, and it comes up heads 1 million consecutive times. You've got 2 choices. The coin has been designed to come up heads every single time, or it came up heads 1 million consecutive times by pure chance. But I would not bet on tails until I examined both sides of the coin and made some measurements on the coin, even if there was tails on one side. We can do this with the universe. We can choose to measure the universe in greater detail in the next 6 months than we've done throughout past human history. And in those additional months of scientific research, we see that the evidence for supernatural design goes up rather than down, then that's a strike against the atheistic model of the multiverse. Now, if you get our book More Than a Theory, we give you 5 more refutations. But we also show you that the multiverse in a Christian context is consistent. The multiverse in an atheistic context is fraught with contradictions. I say that because medieval theologians said nothing less than an infinite universe would befit an infinite God. And since we can't observe beyond our universe, there is a possibility God being a lot more universes.
You said that entropy has been going on since the creation of the universe, and that it is necessary for mankind. But I read in the Bible where it says, essentially, that all creation groans because of the sin of mankind. Therefore, what happened to entropic decay in the universe after Adam's sin? And does that mean that Jeremiah 33:25 is false because of the changing of the physical laws?
Yeah, the passage you're referring to is Romans 8, and it's Romans 8:18 through 20, that says that the entire universe is subject to this pervasive law of decay, what we call in physics entropy. But if you go all the way down to verse 23, it says a time will come when this law of entropy will end. As soon as a full number of people who receive Jesus Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior has been reached, there will be no law of entropy. And this is brought up in Revelation 21, where it talks about how God creates His universe as a vehicle to eliminate evil and suffering. And once that's happened, this universe in which we live will disappear. As God spoke it into existence, He will speak it out of existence and replace it with a brand new creation. And in that creation, there will be no decay for the rest of eternity. And in my book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, I explain why we need entropy in order to be a tool in God's hand to eliminate evil and suffering once and for all. So in that sense, I think we can thank God for the decay because of what it's going to do for us in the future. But as long as the universe exists, there will be entropy. But the universe will not exist forever, according to the Bible.
Now, there will be opportunities to ask Dr. Ross questions in a less public way at the table there. Essentially, what Dr. Ross has argued for, and I want to bring in the so what. The so what. What is the so what? Well, the so what is this. If there is a creator, he asserts that he is Lord over his creation. If he is Lord over his creation, it means that he has a plan for his creation. And this Easter, we're celebrating that plan because that plan culminated in him, the creator of the universe, becoming a man and dying on a cross in our place. Someone has said, in fact it was Lawrence Krauss, the atheist physicist, who recently said, I cannot accept that another person could die in my place to pay my moral debt. Well, Mr. Krauss, the debt is not owed to you. The debt is owed to a God who said this is the only sufficient payment. That is, someone who stands in as a substitute who has never sinned. And that's what Good Friday is about. Yes, it's a time we remember that Jesus Christ died. But it's a time when we celebrate that the Creator, who is Lord, has sent His Son as Saviour to die in our place. We live in a world that has meaning and purpose. If you're an atheist who says there's no God, there can't be any meaning and purpose. But there is meaning and purpose. We want to give you opportunity to discuss this and stay. I think the cafe is open for coffee as well. I'm going to invite the worship team back up. They're going to close with a song, and before they do, I'd like to also invite the Bishop of Tasmania, the Right Reverend John Harrower, to come forward and pronounce a benediction.